Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Blatstein, the physician founder of Physician Presentence Report Service. Today, I'm going to review a little bit of my personal history with self-surrendering, because I've self-surrendered to both a freestanding federal prison camp as well as a satellite prison camp, which is attached to a higher security facility. And the reason that I was able to, or don't want to say privileged, but the reason I had to surrender to both was because I decided, with the recommendations of my attorney, to not ask for an appeal of the sentence, but ask for an appeal of the indictment. In hindsight, I'm not sure how much benefit there would have been to appealing an indictment. When I was in the federal prison camp, everyone said, not everyone, but for those I spoke to, told me, don't appeal, you'll lose. And so during my case, I had hired a AUSA attorney who was a prosecutor and had transitioned over to doing white collar defense. So I assumed that everything was, done the best of the best. And possibly I'm to blame for part of it because that didn't happen. So the reason I'm doing all of my videos, and I had my felony in 2006, but I was able to regain and get my license fully reinstated to practice back in 2010. And the reason I transitioned from patient care is because I was totally unprepared for everything. And that lack of knowledge really, in hindsight, is a problem. And as I speak with clients and talk to other individuals over the past number of years, unfortunately, there are good doctors and bad doctors. There are good attorneys, there are bad attorneys. Not all attorneys are going to understand the nuances of preparing you for when you prepare for your pre-sentence interview, from which the probation officer is going to draft your pre-sentence report. And that is everything in there is going to be reviewed following you throughout your entire course of incarceration, and then after into halfway house. And then, quite frankly, it's going to be with you for a very long time thereafter. But I wasn't prepared. And so we're going to start with when I first surrendered to the federal prison camp, which is in Florida. I flew from the East Coast to the West Coast of the state. And I was that deer in headlights because this experience humbles even the most arrogant of individuals. It can take someone from the top of the financial food chain, which I was not, but that was okay for me, and really set you straight. Because once you go into the system, you are just another number, and it's up to you to do the work necessary to be successful as you prepare to leave and continue with your life. And so I'm saying this because I didn't know what a narrative was. I didn't know what a release plan was. I realized after the fact that a release plan would have been very beneficial because I didn't know what I was going to do. Initially coming out of prison, I wasn't able to practice. That took time and work to get my license back with the state that I was practicing in. But when we drove into their compound, there was no razor wire. A woman came out of the building, saw I was there, took me out of the car, put her arm around me, and said everything was going to be fine. And I was a basket case. But I, she admitted me into the camp. It wasn't much of a search, if you will, of my person. I changed clothes. Those clothes were mailed back to where I came from. I brought in cash with me so that I'd be able to shop right away. And someone took me over to where I would get a bunk. And I had at minimum 200 roommates, some of whom yelled in their sleep at nighttime, but you get used to it. Lights are on, you get used to it. I was near the showers. I was a deer in headlights. I didn't know if that was good or not good. That's where they put me, and I stayed there. And so it is important to be prepared and kind of to know what's expected of you when you get into prison. Part of that could have been reading through the admission and orientation handbook that I could have gotten online, but I didn't. And so it was when I was sitting in to the orientation, there maybe were 25 to 45 guys in the room. And for whatever reason, just this environment, I had some sort of allergic reaction, a virus, I don't know, but I was sneezing and coughing. And for the persons or other inmates there with me who were working their way down from higher security facilities, respect and cleanliness is a very big thing. And so the fact that I was coughing and sneezing, I was covering my mouth, but nobody liked it. And there wasn't anything I could do about it. Went through mission orientation, Went to pill line because you get medications from what's called pill line. And while I'm waiting in line, I still had that deer in headlights look where there were those guys, and I made friends ultimately while I was there, but there were guys that were working their way down from penitentiaries to the camp and then either to halfway house or home. And they would told me not to worry, everything's fine. This is like Disneyland. Well, it didn't appear like Disneyland to me, but be that as it may. And so I got a job in a Pensacola Naval Air Station. This is where the Blue Angels practice. And so that was where my job was. And I was picking up trash sometimes along the beach, but everyone had their own type of job there. There was lots of contraband. People offered me, do you want to smoke a cigar? Do you miss it? And I said, well, I miss it, but I just was too nervous to do anything that was outside of the four corners of what we were told we could do and could not do. And so I spent my time walking the track, doing the job, not preparing for release. And at some point, this becomes normal. And at a certain point, I think it was 10 months or maybe later, you get released to a halfway house, a residential reentry center, then to home confinement, where the probation officer had gone through the home and made sure that everything was okay when I got there. The next event was my appeal. And I didn't know, I just assumed that you get the appeal and it's granted, yes or no. That's not the case. Here, the appeal it was denied, and then they sent me back to prison. And I almost fell through the floor. Then comes to where I had to report to the satellite prison camp, different than a prison camp. And so a friend of mine drove me there, dropped me off at the camp, waited till I walked inside, and I was told I couldn't present or surrender to the camp. I had to surrender to the higher security facility. I didn't know that. And so we drove down. It was a medium security. It was Butner. No, it wasn't. It was Cumberland. So it was Cumberland Satellite Camp and then the medium institution at Cumberland. Well, when we drove down there were buses unloading, guys that had shackles and cuffs and guards around them with long guns in the towers and razor wire everywhere. I thought this was wrong. And so I got back in the car. We drove back up to the camp. At the camp, they said, no, you have to go surrender at the higher security facility at the medium. So I did that. I left, they dropped me off. I came in with money. And after I was searched and went through the screening process, they gave me change of clothes and they stuck me in an isolation room or solitary confinement and said, you're going to have to be there for a while. And I went, why? I just assumed they were going to take me to the camp. No, said the court's orders hasn't arrived yet. So my understanding is now electronically, this doesn't happen anymore. But if we all understand that human beings are putting and scanning and putting all the information into the computer that is then going to be sent to the final destination, which is where the prison you're going to, that's not 100%. And yet I didn't know to think and call ahead of time to make sure that my records were there before I arrived. And so when they started putting me in solitary confinement, I said, give me a phone, because everything they needed was in the car that was driving down the road. They wouldn't do that. And so I was stuck in solitary confinement and I was started to get panicky and then a little bit of claustrophobia. So with that, I guess they figured me out to be just a nutty white boy because I would knock on the door, had one little glass window. They wanted to know what I needed to go to the boys' room. Then they would put me back in there and I didn't have anything to read, anything to do. There wasn't any paper brought to me to fill out. And they went ahead. I wanted to go out of there and then get some water. And this was going on and on. I don't know if it was 15 minutes or it could have been 50 minutes. But at some point, they must have thought this white boy was nuts and very disturbed. And they got a psychologist to come down and talk to me. She came down, she took me out of solitary confinement and stuck me in an individual room with a computer and the door open. She said to wait. You went to speak to the guards. And she came back to me and she said, okay. She said, are you suicidal? I said, no. Are you anxious? I said, very. Are you depressed? I said, yes. She said, why? I said, what do you mean, why? I've already been in a prison camp for how long I had to be there. I had an appeal. I lost it. I was told I had to come back here on a certain day. I'm here at the correct time. And then I put into solitary confinement because somebody lost the orders. And the guards would not let me call the person in the car that was driving away to bring those records back. And I said, this is crazy. And she said to wait a minute. And she left me in there for another, I don't know, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Ultimately, at the end, she came back and they had someone there to escort me to the camp. So now I'm leaving the medium security facility. And as I approach the camp now, there's razor wire there also. There was none at the freestanding camp. And so my my takeaway from Cumberland or from these two facilities is that if you go to a satellite camp first, you really don't know any better. But because I was at a freestanding camp without as much restriction, where my understanding is the guards actually try and apply to get to work there because it's in, you're not next to a higher security the prison with more volatile inmates. And so now that I'm going into the satellite camp, there's a tension in the air. I don't know how to explain it, but it's surrounded by razor wire. There's a small little quad. There is a track. But every time they're at the medium where there's either a fight or a stabbing or there's fog, whatever the reason may be, everything gets locked down at one time. And so all of a sudden, from never having to be restricted into a building, I was, like everyone else, we were told we had to stay in our units. And that just began to give me claustrophobia, even though it was a larger area than just one room. In the satellite camp, there was maybe 16 little cubicles with had 3/4 walls with 2 bunk beds in each, two or 3 bunk beds in each. But what I was grateful for was that there was a dog program, a dog trading program in Cumberland, and it's still there. But I've been around dogs my entire life, and it helps ease whatever tension that you may have. And on top of that, every time that we were, the camps were closed down because of something at the medium, I would volunteer to take the dogs for a walk. And so that to me, was my first impression into the difference between a freestanding camp and a satellite camp. But beyond that, there's probably more programs available now with the First Step Back that you can take to qualify for an early release. But my understanding was also, in speaking to those that have been through the system in the subsequent years, is that the staff at the federal prison camp Pensacola are working very hard to get those that are in there out and home as soon as possible. And so I think that there is a difference. Appealing, I think that I made mistakes. I should have asked the attorney if they have a 98% conviction rate, how many cases or appeals have you won? But I didn't. I didn't know what a narrative was. I didn't know what a release plan was. And I probably needed a release plan because when I finally was indicted and then found guilty, I had to turn in my medical license. What was I going to do? I've only been practicing for 30 years. That's all I knew. I'm grateful that ultimately in 2010, I was able to get my license to practice back, reinstated in full. Still, having a release plan would have been a very smart thing to do, and I didn't. With time, I mean, even in there, everything becomes normal. But my takeaways is that I realized that I was very unprepared for everything. I didn't know what to expect going into prison. I didn't know the layouts. I didn't know a thing. And had I been more prepared, I would have known that when you're going to a satellite camp, which is a camp attached to a higher security facility, you may more than likely be put into an isolation cell for a period of time. But I didn't plan for that. And so part of preparing is trying to make sure that if I had books mailed into me starting 2 days before I arrived, then that would have given me something to do while I was in that isolation cell. But as this is all recognized in hindsight, this was the reason that I chose to transition away from private practice into working with all you so that you get prepared and you know what to expect and you can get in and out as quickly as possible. At the same time, having with your release plan an idea of what you're going to do, because I really didn't have any idea. And when I got out, even at that point in time, I didn't know what my next step was going to be. I hope you found this helpful. I have other information about this on the website. And should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to call and or email me. I'm grateful for you taking the time to listen to this YouTube, and I hope you all have a good day.